más allá de la innovación. Hello, friends of Open IT Innovation. In the past few days, the Open Source Summit Europe, organized by Linux Foundation, took place in the French city of Lyon. During 3 days, lots of personalities from the Linux and open source world gathered to discuss, meet, share, and look at the near future of the code, communities, companies, and organizations where Linux and open source lead the innovation. And, of course, más allá de la innovación, have wanted to be present at this important meeting. In this special podcast, we will approach the opinions of some of the most prominent Congress attendees, such as Jim Zemlin, Executive Director at Linux Foundation, Shirley Goodman, Executive Director at Linux Foundation Energy, Jonah Bacon, Community and Collaboration Strategy Consultant, author and speaker, Patrick Mason, General Manager and Board Director at Open Source Initiative, and Eric Adams, Technical Marketing Engineer at Intel Corporation. This special edition of Más allá de la innovación is held in English, which is the official language of the event and serves as a prologue and advance to a more extensive and more detailed edition of the summit, which will offer next week in Spanish, our native podcast language. Our partner, Philippe Lardy, was present in Lyon, and he is the one to introduce us to the interesting opinions of our interviewers.
Jim Zemlin tells us about different projects hosted by the Linux Foundation, such as Automotive Grade Linux in collaboration with car builders like Daimler, Toyota, or Academy Software Foundation in collaboration with Hollywood entertainment companies. We can see that in most of these projects, open source methodologies and standards are applied.
So the Linux Foundation in 2019 is now home to over 230 open source projects, some of the most important open source projects in the world, things like Linux, Kubernetes, Node.js, and many, many more. We have projects almost every layer of the technology stack. We have a project called Drone Code for unmanned aerial vehicles. We have a project in the film industry in partnership with the Motion Picture Academy called the Academy Software Foundation. We have a project that is the world's largest certificate authority, Let's Encrypt. And so we've been working on a variety of different initiatives to help enable large-scale open and collaborative development. Our organization has in particular grown over the last few years, working in wholesale new industries. So traditionally, our organization worked with technology companies on infrastructure software. Operating system software, middleware, application frameworks, and so forth. More recently, we've seen entire industries, whether it's the film and television and gaming industry with the Academy Software Foundation, or the energy sector with our Linux Foundation Energy Initiative, coming to us asking to help them use open source methodologies and principles to improve the state of technology in their industry. Goals are to increase the speed of innovation, to lower the cost of technology, to break out from particular single vendor lock-in in some cases, but all of them want to use the same principles that we've applied to things like Linux and Kubernetes for their particular sector. And that's been really successful in the telecommunications sector. Our networking projects are now used by 80% of the world's operators, if you measure them by subscribers, to manage and orchestrate their virtual infrastructure. Our automotive project is in millions of production automobiles from companies like Toyota and Daimler and others. And so we're really happy to see, as open source has become so important to technology, that we've been able to play a role to bring whole industries together to work cooperatively in an open way to create interesting software. And that's a lot of fun.
We have the opportunity to speak with Dr. Shirley Goodman, who tells us about the Linux Foundation Energy, one of the projects hosted by the Linux Foundation. Also, it is a social, environmental, and political issue. Linux Foundation Energy is an open source code project to accelerate technological innovation and enable the energy transition globally.
It's important that folks understand that even though LF Energy is addressing something that is a political, social, environmental issue that is facing the planet, fundamentally, we are a project that is all about code. We are a Linux Foundation project, and so what we are looking at is the commodity software, the plumbing, the infrastructure that needs to get laid down in order to be able to accelerate innovation, climb the value chain, decrease costs. Those are the kinds of things that we're after, and it's important to me that listeners understand that fundamentally we're about code. When we first started, we did a little video. You can see it on YouTube. Wanted 10,000 developers, because what I want is to be able to create a movement. I think that if you are in your 20s and 30s, or if you're in your teens, or even if you're in your 40s, you're looking at what's ahead and you're wondering, I don't know how to be effective. This scares me. What am I giving to my children? And it's because of that I really want folks to know, okay, maybe you don't know much about energy right now, but that's something that you can learn about. And what we need are digital-first people who are developers, who understand code, they understand all the various aspects of, building good, solid code, to get involved and to come to our summit or to join our mailing list go to lfenergy.org. We hope to see you in Paris, and thank you very much.
On the other hand, Jonah Bacon takes us through the presentation he has given during the event, as well as a presentation of his new book. One of the main objectives in this edition was to talk about open source and collaboration, while recommending tools and giving advices to the world in order to help building the very best communities.
My name is Jonah Bacon. I am a community and collaboration consultant, and my goal is to basically help the world to build the very best communities that they can. So I'm really excited to be here at the Linux Foundation Open Source Summit. I come to these events every year. I just get a lot of value out of this. And part of the reason why I'm here is because I actually run one of the tracks that's here, which is focused on open source and collaboration. And this morning I delivered my own presentation, which was recommending a series of tools and best practices for how people can build communities. So I talked about which code hosting platforms you use, which web technologies you should use, which communication platforms you should use, and those kinds of different things. And I think what I'm excited about next is my new book, which is called People Powered: How Communities Can Supercharge Your Business Brand and Teams, which is going to be out by HarperCollins Leadership on the 12th of November. And I'm really excited about this because a lot of people who I work with would say, oh, I've read your book, which is The Art of Community, which is a very technical book. And this is more of a high-level business book about what is the value of a community, not just open source, but other types of communities. How do you build out a community strategy? How do you get people involved, run events? How do you incentivize people? And then how do you incorporate all of that stuff into your organization, into your business? How do you hire the right people? How do you measure it? What are your maturity models? So I'm pretty excited about that coming out as well. So there's a number of things that go into this book. So I basically, over the last 21 years, I've essentially built a methodology of how you build a community. And it goes from, first of all, understanding what kind of community you want to build, whether it's a consumer community, a champion community, or a collaborator community, and they're quite different. It then walks through how do you build the value for your users as well as yourself, your organization. Then how do you carve out the personas for how are you targeting developers? Are you targeting people writing documentation, people organizing events, people translating things? And then how do you take all of that value and that target audience and break that down into a set of goals that you're going to run for the next year? And I've developed a framework that walks through how do you build the right on-ramps to get people involved, and what is the journey? People start out as casual members, then they become regulars, then they become core members, and then how do you measure it? And I include 3 different maturity models in the book for not just how do you make sure that people are actually joining and doing great work, but how do you bake those skills into your company as well. So
Patrick Mason commented on the past 20 years for the open source initiative and the evolution of the use of open source at the corporate level and the challenges they have to take into account for the future.
Hello, this is Patrick Mason. I'm the general manager at the Open Source Initiative. The Open Source Initiative celebrated 20 years, 2028, a year ago, and it was really a point of reflection for us. We recognized that the first 10 years was really about awareness and addressing a lot of the traditional pushback that organizations would put out around open source, sort of the old arguments about is it secure, who are you going to call for support, how can it be any good if it's built by amateurs. Those arguments, hopefully, from a lot of work from the OSI and open source communities faded away, and we saw the acceptance of open source. And I think 2012 was actually, sort of the turning point where most organizations would say that open source is one, and we now see it as part of every company and every organization's portfolio, whether they're using it as somewhere inside the organization or including open source as part of their products and services. And so today, the OSI recognizes that we all agree that it's succeeded and it leads to success and innovation and reduces total cost of ownership and fosters innovation and all those benefits. And the OSI is now really focused on ensuring authenticity within the open source community. So that's manifesting in a lot of ways. We're seeing new challenges around licensing as organizations begin to, and projects begin to struggle with sustainability. How can they ensure that the projects that are being developed are here tomorrow? How can they ensure that not just corporate sponsorship, but active engagement from a community? So how can an organization or a project behave in a way to foster contributions? So that's a big issue for us now. Education, a lot of the folks that are working in open source today grew up. It's just a common development environment for them. The expectation is sort of open source first. And the same benefits that open source provides to help people enter into technology fields, software fields that open source provides around, you can just find a project and get involved in a small bit and learn skills and find community and become more engaged. And that can lead to larger roles within the project and then maybe even opportunities with companies that are using that technology. That sort of emergent process brings with it some challenges. Where perhaps those folks weren't as familiar with sort of some of the other issues around open source, so licensing and intellectual property issues. So how can we help those who are getting the great technical skills and that are available through open source projects and the communities of practice that are all working together to support each other? The OSI really wants to start working with those organizations to help them introduce the other aspects. It's not just technology, but also around intellectual property and licensing. So one of the things we're doing is we've started a partnership with Brandeis University to help their graduate program, both the MBA program and the Masters in Technology program, create a specialization around open source. So there'll be 3 courses. One is the businesses of open source, which I'm sure if anyone who's following open source today, there's a lot of questions about business models associated with open source. Then community building in open source. And so how does a project foster community contributions, participation, and then finally the technology around open source? What are the common platforms that are used and tools and techniques to help successful projects? So that's just one example of the educational initiatives we're working with. And again, it's all about that creating authentic communities of practice so that not only are projects being successful from the technology they're using, but they're also being successful understanding the non-technical issues around community and intellectual property and so on.
Finally, Eric Adam tells us that Intel is one of the largest contributors to open source in the world and the largest Linux kernel contributor. They could not miss this event as Diamond sponsor.
All right, so my name is Eric Adams and I'm with Intel Corporation. We are here at the Open Source Summit as a Diamond sponsor for the Linux Foundation, showing off 6 different demos. We are one of the largest contributors to open source in the world, and I believe we are the largest contributor to the Linux kernel for open source projects. Open source is very important to Intel, and we believe in it very deeply. We work very hard to try to provide high-quality software, and we want to make sure that it runs great on our processors. We have many different projects. You can see a listing of some of our best projects at 01.org. That's the website that we use for Intel open source projects.
Más allá de la innovación is an informative project in podcast format sponsored by Open Expo. Subscribe to the podcast on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, iVoox, Spreaker, Spotify, YouTube Audios, or visit us. Listen to us and subscribe to the feed on our website, másalladelainnovacion.com.